All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Doomer Optimism podcast. This is Anarchocontrarian, or AC for short, and I am here tonight with Trace Crow as co-host, and we're here to talk to our friend and overall Twitter nice guy, Tom Ruby. That's how I'm going to frame the conversation. You're, I think, the nicest account on Twitter, and we're here to talk a little bit about your homestead, your path to Doomer Optimism, your approach to localism, some of your professional work, and some of your relationship with Trace. So I would like to maybe start by allowing you to introduce yourself and give us the Tom Ruby 101. So take it away, Tom.
Well, that's something that nobody's ever said to me, the nicest account on Twitter. And there's a first time, I guess, for for a lot of things. That thank you, AC. That's very kind. Um, let's see. Um, I was I came to Doomer Optimism by accident because the algorithm, I guess, brought me um, to a small circle, and that circle started expanding. And I really like the circle. I mean, I like it because it fits. Um, well, I guess I find myself among kindred spirits there. Um, Pope Benedict, when he was a young priest, he said the world wants to give you comfort, but you weren't made for comfort; you were made for greatness. And and I think that there's people within the Doomer Optimism circle that have a greatness inside them. They don't necessarily flout it. Some of them don't even necessarily know it. But I think that if we ever get hit with any kind of a doomer type event, like even something natural like a Carrington event, that's the one that I always use because it happened in the past. I think there's going to be a lot of people in the DO circle that are going to lead with greatness. So that's how I came to the DO circle. Um, a little bit about me. Um, I was born in Yugoslavia when it was a communist country. My mother escaped with me. My father was in Paris as a guest worker. My mother literally escaped. The reason she had to escape was because my family was enemies of the state because they fought against both the Germans and the communists during World War II. Um, Tito killed all of our adult male family members, dumped them in a ravine near our village. And my mother never knew her father. He was in a German POW camp with his brother. They were captured 300 miles and 3 years apart, ended up in the same POW camp, and ended up coming across the ocean in 1947 and lived the American dream. My mother's father was a janitor at a fine men's clothier in Los Angeles. Bought a house in Westwood. Bought a house in Santa Monica. His brother, my mother's uncle, was a construction worker, a union construction worker that built the freeways and aqueducts of Southern California, and he also bought a house in Santa Monica. Um, I don't think we can do that anymore in America today. So when my mother escaped and came over here to the States with me, um, that made my children first generation Americans. And I was the first person in my family's bloodline to go to college, to get advanced degrees. Um, I served 26 years as an officer in the Air Force and retired to the farm here in the knobs of central Kentucky. And it's funny, my cousins that I'm really close with in Serbia say, all we wanted all of our lives was to get out of the village and move to the city. And you couldn't wait to get out of the city and move to the village. And we don't get it. And they don't, and they won't. And I've never been happier, and my family's never been happier. So today, for the last 11 years, I've had a very small, one man shop consultancy. I do small business consulting and leadership development. And I try to help small businesses and their CEOs, um, try to do things like how to not suck at business. When because nobody teaches you these things. People have really good ideas, but um, I'm what I've learned in the last 12 years is I'm shocked that we have an economy in this country. Um, the number of people that have 2,600 emails in their inbox and don't have any folders is just shocking to me. And yet they still make money somehow, and most of them really want to get better. And so uh, that's what I do now on my on my time, and I do a lot less of that than I do volunteering and mentoring and traveling to see my grandkids and seeing cool stuff with my wife, and doing little side projects like the cultural debris excursion with my friend Alan Cornett. So that's it. That's a high level overview. Maybe too much.
I didn't know. It's great. I love the city to country angle. So why Kentucky? What brought you to Kentucky?
When Laura and I joke about when we were little, meaning when we were in our early days of our marriage, we drove across the country several times, north, south, and east, west, and quite a few of our drives took us through Kentucky on the highways. We even did one trip where we took like county roads and state roads through a good part of the state, and for several trips we said it's too bad there isn't a base in this state. This would be a cool place to be based. But there were no Air Force bases in the state, and that it doesn't work that way. You can't just say, hey, I'd like to go live in this state, okay, because that's not how assignments work. So there came a point in my career where the Air Force sent me to go get a PhD, and they said, you can go wherever you want, you can study whatever you want. And I knew I wanted to study morality and warfare, international relations. And I asked the dean at the school, tell me, what do you think about University of Kentucky? And he says, great program. They got a great faculty right now. That'd be a great place for you to go. And so that's what we did. We ended up in Lexington for 3 years. And while we were in Lexington, we really fell in love with the state. And the honest to God truth is that we were out looking for property, and we were kind of bummed out because one of the properties that we really were hoping to find or hoping to buy, it was in a county that wasn't zoned, and they were going to put up like an industrial plant behind the property. And so we were kind of bummed out, and I heard a voice in my head, like an angel saying Danville. And I called Laura and I said, hey, the voice is telling me Danville. And she says, you ever been to Danville? I said, yeah, I mean, I've driven through it on the way to and from Maker's Mark and the distillery. She goes, well, is it nice? I go, yeah, it's really nice. So we started looking up farm properties, and we found one and called the realtor, and she asked us about our family situation and what we were going to be doing. And she said, that's just not the right property for you. But it's funny that you should call me because somebody just handed me a piece of paper with a listing that's not even up yet. Would you like to go see it? And we said yes. And it was the most beautiful combination of pasture and woods that we could imagine. And today we have 15 and a half acres, and we've taken about 7 or 8 acres that was in pasture and turned it into woods. In a deliberate, move with our state foresters in conjunction with the foresters, and getting a lot of help. And when I say getting a lot of help, I'm talking about ideas, but the sweat of identifying trees in the fall, marking them, and then in the winter, in the middle of winter when it's really cold, digging them out by the roots, and then transplanting them, over a period of years. And you've seen the Twitter threads, what it used to look like when it was a hayed pasture. And today it's woods that are 15, 20 feet tall, and it's just wonderful. So we couldn't be happier with where we live. And that's it.
It's fantastic. So that's a quick overview, and there's a couple threads that I want to get back to. But one thing that you hadn't mentioned yet is a little bit more on your faith. and your involvement in the Society of G.K. Chesterton. And I'm assuming those things are linked in some way. So can you give us a quick high level there?
Yeah. I'm an adult convert to Catholicism, and G.K. Chesterton had a lot to do with that. His writings and his joy, first of all, his wit. He was humorous, but really his just really incisive logic. He could cut through an issue that he admits to lots of gray areas in the world, but he also is fairly black and white in what's right and wrong. And I looked at his own story about how he went from atheism to very deep depression to a basic Christianity, to finding his way into the church. And it kind of mirrored my own conversion story. And I started reading him. I became a member of the society years and years ago, and subscribed to Gilbert magazine. And I started going to the conferences. I met the leadership in the society. I started, offering an article here and there. And one day they asked me to be on the board. And I take that as one of my highest honors, getting to do that around a lot of people around the table that are far more qualified than I am. So,
can you tell us a little bit more about the society itself, how it functions, what its mission is?
Sure. So the idea is to spread the word, about who this guy G.K. Chesterton was. 100 years ago, we don't have an analog here in the States. I mean, if I was to say to you Beyonce or Taylor Swift, and then say, yeah, Chesterton was more popular in the United States in his day than Beyonce and Taylor Swift are today, people would shake their head and go, I've never even heard of the guy. How can that be possible? When he came to the United States on a couple of trips, he sold out auditoriums from Madison Square Garden in New York to community theaters and playhouses across the Midwest. He spent 3 months at Notre Dame speaking to crowds that couldn't fit in the Convocation Center. Okay. He was a journalist. He was an author. He wrote literary criticism. He wrote books about his book about Charles Dickens is one of the best books that you can read on any subject anywhere. He wrote 4,000 newspaper columns, published a newspaper himself, was the inventor of detective fiction. Okay. Arthur Conan Doyle learned from G.K. Chesterton. He wrote what are considered hands down to be the best biographies of both St. Francis of Assisi and St. Thomas Aquinas. And both are, stand by, I'm sorry. Both biographies are short. They're very, very eminently readable. And they're wonderful. So the breadth of his writings were magnificent. But he wrote a book called Heretics about modern day heresies of the time. And this was before he was a Catholic. He followed that up with a book called Orthodoxy that came out 10 years before his conversion. And I think his greatest work was probably The Everlasting Man. When I picked up that book, I had heard about it for a long time. When I finally picked it up, I read the first chapter and I put it down and I said to my wife, honey, I got to go to the store. She says, okay, what for? I said, I got to get a highlighter. And I came back today. I would have just, underlined and written margin notes, but I was young then. And his detective fiction is outstanding. His literary criticism is outstanding. I could recommend multiple different books for you.
That's
So the
great.
society is about getting the word out about him, evangelization through the work of G.K. Chesterton. And for the last few years, the society has founded and run the Chesterton Schools Network. It is now not just the fastest growing, but the largest network of classic private Catholic schools in the country, and it's growing very, very fast. These are affordable, classical education schools, small schools. Some of them even have sports programs. Okay, but they teach your kids the timeless classics, like all liberal arts education used to be when we were young and before. And so the society has the literary society arm to it, and it has the educational arm to it. And I'm just really excited to be part of it.
That's great. Cool. Yeah, huge fan of Chesterton. So I hope to get back to each one of these points, maybe in a little bit more detail and in order. So maybe we can go back towards the beginning and touch on your current professional work, which is, sort of leadership coaching, leadership development. And there's a thread there with Trace, and maybe we can start with you, Trace, and just talk about your relationship that you've established with Tom, which I think is a great, sort of DO to IRL success story, if you will. So give us the high level there, Trace, and I'd love to hear you guys just in general talk about your in real life experience.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is I met Tom for the first time when I was on a panel discussion with him. Was it last year, Tom, or was it earlier this year? I don't know. Time is very weird now, but
I think it was December, and we were talking about parenting. Is that correct?
Yeah. It was Doomer Optimism Parenting, whatever that means. I don't think we came to any kind of consensus on that in that 90-minute conversation. But while we were having it, I was straight up vibing with Tom. Like, I just met this guy, and the things he was saying about his journey really resonated with me, because I felt like I was like a turn back the clock, like a 15-year younger version of himself, And I was thinking, like, gosh, the way he's describing the way he got out of the rat race, and his recognition, it happened when his oldest was 12. At the time I interviewed him, my oldest was 12, and I'm sitting here thinking, like, gosh, I'm feeling the same way. Like, I'm on a speeding train and I can't get off of it. And I think it was about a couple months after that, it kind of occurred to me that, like, I really, I'm at this position in my career where I could really use someone who's been there, done that, to be a mentor and kind of help me grow into a better leader. And the first person that came to mind was Tom. And so I think I just DM'd you over Twitter, right, Tom? And was just like, hey, would you be open to being a mentor? And his response was, I rarely say no to someone who asks. He's like, if you know enough to know that you need a mentor and you're actually asking me, I'll at least give you the time of day to explore this further. And it was pretty well, I mean, it was a perfect situation for me. Like, the second we started talking, I realized that he had a lot of things to teach me personally, in business. I think spiritually as well. I'm not a Catholic. I would say that I'm not even a Christian, but, like, there's aspects to what I do. There's aspects to the way I view the world that is very, very spiritual, very religious, and I would say, arguably is in the Judeo-Christian, tradition, and so there's been a lot of resonance with what we've been doing, and I can't speak highly enough about the man. He's a beautiful person, and I hope to have a knob of my own someday. Right now, I just got the Old Crow Hill here in the suburbs of Tucker, suburbs of Atlanta, but I'm constantly energized and in like really inspired by what you do, Tom. I actually have a funny story about Tom. Is he came to Atlanta to work with me and the founder of Roots Down, my business partner, Jamie. And him and I went out to dinner one of the nights, and Tom, you're one of the most knowledgeable people about oaks I think I've ever met in my life. Like, you know, like all the different versions of oaks. And we went past, what, do you remember what kind of oak it was? Because you were like, this thing only drops acorns like every 4 years, and there were acorns everywhere. And you just picked up a few and put them in your pocket. And he's like, I'm gonna take this back to the knob with me. And I was thinking, like, I wrote down here, I was like, we need to talk about your guerrilla arborism. You're like,
Yeah,
you just
there is.
sort of
There's
pick seeds up, acorns, you pick them up all around the world and bring them back to the knob. I think that's just amazing.
Yeah, I'm kind of like a squirrel in that respect, and I do. I It's so funny that you caught on to that. I don't remember the type of tree. I now that you say it, I remember that that I was intrigued, and that I brought home some acorns, but I would have forgotten that had you not just mentioned it.
Yeah, I thought it was a beautiful thing. As you were doing it, I was like, gosh, I wish I had space on my property to like grab one of these acorns, because you made it seem like it was like but I think it's the way you view the world, Tom, that you're walking through, you know, we're just going from dinner to the car, right, to take you back to your place. And you're just like, wow, look at these magical trees. They're just sprinkling their joy all over the world. And I'm going to snag a bit of that for myself. And you know, I personally have walked past those trees probably 100 times, right, and never thought twice about it.
Yeah, the Lord gives us the Lord built the garden. He created the garden, and then he created the gardener. And you know, that's not a theological statement. Okay, it's a statement of fact, of precedence. Okay, first God created the garden, and then he created the gardener. And he gave the gardener tasks and, you know, knowledge and dominion over that garden. And, you know, we do a lot in this world to ruin our garden. But we can fix it really quickly. And one way to do that is to plant more trees, especially nut-bearing trees and fruit-bearing trees and fruit forests. And so it's neat that you picked up on that, Trace. And I love what you're doing with your place as well. I mean, you're trying to make a food forest out of a suburban city lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say about Trace that, you know, I've had quite a few mentees over the last 10 years that, you know, where the people are going through whatever they're going through at the time, and they need somebody to talk to, and they want to bounce some ideas off of, and that's great. Everybody needs that. And I've had a few guys that have said, okay, that was a great book. Okay, what's the next one? Okay, great book. What's the next one? Great book. What's the next one? And then suddenly I don't hear from them anymore. And that's fine too. But Trace wants to talk regularly, and it's not free therapy. He's not just calling me to be his free therapist. Okay, he's actually, you know, doing the mentoring thing the right way. He's actually asking specific questions. He's challenging. He's saying, how would I implement that? Okay, I've got a problem with this. And then he goes and tries it. And it's wonderful to have someone like Trace that takes it seriously. And I think that if you get to the point in life where somebody calls you and asks you, you know, for mentoring help, you ought to probably at least try. Not everybody's going to be a good mentor, because it's not like George Costanza, you know, where you know, the girl says, well, what do you think about this book? And he goes, why don't you read it and tell me what you think about it? Okay, that's not how it goes. You know, so I'm very happy to be friends with Trace.
Yeah. Beautiful story. All right, so you touched on, you know, the second layer, which is sort of the gardening aspect, and I'd like to spend some time, you know, going back there and talking a little bit more about your homestead and your approach in life as gardener, quote unquote. So you talked about your 15 plus acres. You know, what is your approach to your land, Tom? How do you, what vision do you have for it? How do you manage it? are there economic endeavors on your land? Is it strictly recreational hobbyist? Give us a little bit more in depth.
It's interesting. The first thing that my first state forester said is, how do you want to make money off of your land? Do you want to get cash out of your timber? What do you want to do? Some of the trees had been marked for timbering, and I've been told on multiple occasions you can get $6,000 to $10,000 for that white oak right there, because I have some really, really old growth white oaks, and there's a lot of cooperages around here that make barrels for the bourbon industry, and bourbon has to be put in new charred oak barrels. And, believe it or not, the white oaks are just getting depleted. And so now they're going to have to, you can see the distilleries are trying to use different kinds of oaks. And when I was asked if I want to sell this, if I want to sell this tree for $6,000, I thought, crap, I'm going to spend that money pretty quickly. And it's going to take 200 years for this tree to grow back. Heck no. And the biomass that tree drops every year in the form of food for the animals, hey, you can't replace that. Then what happens? So, here's a simplified way of how I see our garden, especially. I see it as potential energy. Okay. It's like a heavy weight on a cliff. That's potential energy, right? Until it gets pushed over the edge and falls to the ground, it's not actual energy, but it's potential energy. So I see a lot of people, especially in DO circles, who are like, oh, do not till your soil. It's the worst thing you can do. And none of those people have had to deal with binweed. Okay. When you have a garden, and we've got a pretty big walled in garden, okay, and we have a walled in garden for very specific reasons. One, it keeps the deer out. Two, it keeps the warm temperatures in. And our very first winter here, we had 6 weeks additional growing season. Okay, 6 weeks from the last frost to the first frost inside the garden. We had a 6-week longer growing season than outside the walls. Okay, so that's a really important thing. But being close to woods, okay, in our zone of the country is really hard. Okay, you're constantly fighting the weeds. Okay, we fight with knotweed and we fight with binweed constantly. Okay, and for all the guys that are out there going, oh, all you got to do is just plant some broadleaf squash. They'll keep the sun, off of them, and do the Trinity and it'll work great. And I go, great, come show me what I'm doing wrong. Okay, come show me what I'm doing wrong. Now, so we grow enough tomatoes and peppers that I can make, I can lots and lots of roasted peppers and tomatoes, to serve with eggs and cheese and bread on charcuterie boards. And I get a lot of squash, but really the garden is potential energy in case we ever have to feed ourselves. We have an orchard that we planted again with the view to the long, term. We have apple trees, lots of plum trees, cherry trees, a couple of peach trees. And, last year we had so much fruit that there was a standing invitation here on the knob. Anybody could come any day of the week with as big a bucket as you want and pick as many plums and apples as you want. And they did. And still more than half the fruit fell to the ground. Okay. And then it fed the deer, and then we ate the deer. But I know a lot of the DO guys would be out there saying, well, heck, why didn't you like cider at all? Or why didn't you? Well, because that's not my gig. Okay. I mean, if I need to, I can do all that. I know how to do it. And I'm playing around with certain things, but it's nice. We have a really nice orchard. We can grow our vegetables. And if we go away on vacation for a couple of weeks, we come back, the garden looks like a jungle, But but I know that if we need to live off of it, we can. So we save seeds and we dry out seeds. And I haven't bought a tomato plant in 6 or 7 years because, I let I let the tomatoes rot. I throw them up in the air, and wherever they splat, the next year tomatoes come up. It's awesome.
Hmm. Do you have any perennials planted in the
Oh, yeah,
walled garden?
Yeah. So I think I've sent you some pictures, but half of our garden is just perennials.
Mm-hmm.
And actually more than half so we have 6,000 square feet inside the walled garden. And so I would say probably 4,000 square feet of that is either decorative paths and perennials, herbs, and lots and lots of perennial flowers.
Lovely. So you kind of opened the door with the cidery, with mentioning the cider. You make liqueur. Yeah, talk about that. It always looks so amazing. I have to get up to Kentucky to have some of it.
You're welcome. And I'm having a little mug of maple liqueur right now. So this comes from tapping our maple trees, and it's too valuable to me to boil it down into syrup for pancakes. So I make I boil it down and I make maple liqueur out of it. So what started was about 10 years ago, one of my dear friends from Alabama came up to visit, and we were drinking some chartreuse. And we were both talking about how good it is and how expensive it is. It's $65, $70 a bottle for a bottle of chartreuse. And I thought, I got 1,000 wild herbs out here. I'll bet you I can make chartreuse. And he goes, yeah, I bet you probably could. Do you know how? I go, no, but I'm about to find out. And so I looked up how to make liqueur, and it's pretty damn simple. You get 95% grain alcohol, and you steep something in it for a while. And so the first thing I did is I started, I went out to my garden and I picked a bunch of, marjoram and different kinds of thyme and sage and tarragon, and then I just started going into the wild herbs. My current wild herb liqueur has 21 different herbs in it. And well, it turned out better than the chartreuse. And man, I love the monks at the Abbey of Chartreuse, but I'm not giving them $70 a bottle anymore. and so at this point, then it became a game. Then it literally became a game. So what else could we do? Well, we get hundreds of pounds of wild blackberries if we wanted to eat them every year. We can't eat all of our blackberries that grow here, wild blackberries. Can we make liqueur out of it? Yup. Mulberries that are falling off the trees. Yup. Sassafras. Wow. Sassafras is pretty cool. I bet we can make liqueur out of that. It's stunningly good. Let's see if we can make liqueur out of maple syrup. Yup, you could do that. Hey, I'm growing some hops. I'll bet you the Bavarians make a really good Hopfen liqueur. Okay. And I thought, well, I haven't been to Bavaria in a while. Let's see if I can make Hopfen liqueur. And I use raw honey from here on the knob. And I go, yep, that's great. Hopfen liqueur is great. And oh, hey, the hazelnut crop came in really good this year from our hazelnuts. Let's try that. It's 10 times better than Frangelico. And so now it's a game. You saw the pictures from, when we went up to Michigan. I found a bunch of wild apples up on the UP, and wild apples up in Minnesota, in a town that doesn't even exist anymore. And so, yeah, that wild apple liqueur was just outstanding.
So
hang on. I was going to say the beauty of this is it's not like going to the store where you can just buy more chartreuse or buy more beer. Okay. I only have enough. I've got however much maple syrup I boil down is how much liqueur I can make. And that's got to last me until the next time I get more. Okay. When I make my wild persimmon liqueur, this year, it's going to be a very small run, because this year we had a horrific drought in the spring this year, from the end of March. We didn't get any rain the last week of March, all of April and all of May and all of June. We didn't get any rain. And so none of our fruit trees produced this year. Didn't get a single fruit off of our fruit trees after a bounty crop last year. And the wild persimmons this year, I got a small bowl full of them. So whatever we can make out of that small bowl full of persimmons is going to be all the liqueur I've got for this year. So it's kind of like God's way of saying, hey, be thankful for what you get and enjoy it and be thankful for that, and wait in joyful anticipation until the next crop.
So I'm so fascinated by this. And also I take offense with your use of maple syrup, given my cultural heritage.
That's fine. That's fine. I got plenty of maple trees here. And it's how much can I tap? I'm not an industrial operation like you guys have.
I'm just playing. The basics, right? So Everclear, grain alcohol, 95% alcohol, steep some product in it, a fruit, nut, herbs, what have you. Time frame, how long?
10 days to 2 weeks. I sit it in the window. And
shaking
then
are you shaking it every day?
I do, just because it's fun. And I shake it up every day. And so what happens with the herbs is the herbs go in pliable, right? If you pick yarrow, wild yarrow, right? It's like a little fern. Okay. After 2 weeks, it comes out brittle. Okay. It's completely brown. All the chlorophyll has been removed, all of the oils. So that's what makes it so healthy. The essential oils out of all of these plants are taken out. And what you're left with is dried, brittle plants, because the alcohol, it literally dehydrates those plants. It removes all of their oils out of them. And so what I do is I run it through a sieve and cheesecloth. And then I either, sometimes like always, I burn the hops because it's awesome to listen to that crackling sound because they're full of that alcohol. But what I do, like with the fruits, is I run them through the cheesecloth and I squeeze the crap out of them to get every last bit of the liquid and the oils out. And chartreuse is nice and clear because they actually filter it. They actually remove all the oil. They let it settle, and then they siphon off the top. Okay, and then there's wastage. And when we make ours, none of that goes to waste. And in fact, before we drink it, you're always flipping the bottle over to give it a good shake so that you can get the oils. Even maple syrup has oil in it. It's fascinating.
Sure. Now, are you cutting it and are you sweetening it?
It's to be a liqueur, you need to cut it and you need to slightly sweeten it. So like my fruit liqueurs get very, very little sugar, if any. The herbals all get a little bit of sugar. How much is there's a sweet spot right there. You don't want to get too sweet, but if you don't add enough, it can, people will think it's stronger in alcohol than it actually is. I cut it in half, so it ends up being somewhere in the vicinity of, 95 proof, which is about what chartreuse is. So, it's about what a decent bourbon is, right? 95
so the rule of thumb is cut it by half.
Yeah. So however much alcohol you put in, that much water you put in.
Yep.
Okay.
And then shelf life for an extended forever. I mean, for an extended period of time. Yeah.
It's forever, but it doesn't make it to forever because what ends up happening is this. I don't think I drink half of our liqueur because it ends up going as gifts, and when people come over, they want it, and it's a novelty for a lot of people. But so when I was just in Genoa, and the girls that run the B&B that our cultural debris group stayed at, Fanny loved the maple, and I knew how much she liked it. So I was very I was very careful about how much of that we doled out to the guests so that I could leave her a half liter.
Mm, mm, mm.
Okay. And, Elena got she got a half liter of the herbal. And, Rosa, the lady that makes the best gelato in the world, she got a bottle of the apple. So, it's a joy to give away as a gift.
Sure. Now, what about wines? Are you strictly cordials?
No, I just stick with cordials, and it's not that I can't, like, I've got a son-in-law that he loves making beer, and so we've done beer here together. And what I've done is I've got a neighbor here on the knob that may or may not have a still, and who shall go nameless, but he gets a lot of the fruits and makes brandies out of them, and he can give me grain alcohol that's left over, that's essentially a byproduct for him.
Mm-hmm.
To make my own. And that's now we're getting into distributism, right? Now we're getting into localism.
Sure. That's where I want to go next. Sort of. First, you talked about your gardening and your approach to your property is, stored energy, sort of a hedge against uncertain times, perhaps. How did you get there? How did you get to that frame of mind? Why?
So in the Air Force, I was a planner. I was an intelligence officer, and then I ended up being a strategic planner. So I started out as a young officer, actually planning missions to Baghdad during Desert Storm, and how to efficiently take down certain types of systems. And it made me think about our own systems. So it made me think about what were the vulnerabilities here in the United States, because I thought about vulnerabilities in other countries, right? So not just in water supplies, but electrical power. And, people in this country would be shocked if they knew, like, I can't give you the exact number, so I won't, but it's an extremely small number. Okay. If I was to ask you how many power substation transformers do you think there are in bench stock in this country? Okay, for the sum total of all the number of utilities that we have in this country, what is the total number of spare power transformers for substations? How many do you think there are in this country? I think that the actual number is under 20. Okay, for the whole country. Okay, if there's a cascading grid failure in this country, and I'm not talking about from a cyber attack, I'm just talking about from something that's natural, like the Carrington event. Everybody should look up what the Carrington event is. It was a solar storm that hit the Earth in 1859. Okay, and it blew up anything that was electric. So yeah, don't tell me that there wasn't electricity at the time. I know. But there were like telegraph lines, and there were early, like, barbed wire, and it literally blew up everywhere that it existed. There was so much energy put out by the sun that it fried everything. It literally blew up like barbed wire. If the Carrington event hit the Earth today, there's no way that you could, like, how do you make new power transformers without power? How do you rebuild the grid? How do you rebuild the power grid? How do you pump oil out of the ground without electricity? How do you refine oil without electricity? Mm-hmm. Okay. So I started thinking about, okay, how did the world exist? Like, we got out of the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages were dark. Why? Because the people that invaded Europe burned all the libraries. Okay. And so all the knowledge was gone within a generation, and it took a long time to get that back. If you read Thomas Cahill's How the Irish Saved Civilization, it was great because Irish monks had books that had not been burned, and they took upon themselves a decades-long program of copying multiple copies of everything in their libraries, and then sending them out with monks to spread to repopulate libraries across Europe. It's fantastic. So what would we do in that type of situation today? One of the best books that you can read on that is A Canticle for Leibowitz. Wonderful. And so I started thinking, well, what could I do at a practical level? Okay, well, I could learn how to garden. I could build a house that's resilient. Okay, and so I set upon a program, a 15-year plan of, my last 15 years in the Air Force. I actually designed a home, and then we built it so that we could live on in the case of a grid down failure. So I don't think of myself as a doomsday prepper at all, but I do think in terms of resilience and having a place that's big enough for the whole family, all of our kids and their families to live, and they can help all of our neighbors. And believe it or not, our neighbors here on the Knob, we talk about resilience. We talk about who has cisterns, how do we get water? How do we actually, do farming and stuff like that? And a big part of that is to let nature grow the food for you. So in years past, I have made acorn muffins in the wintertime by going out and collecting acorns and shelling the acorns, and then taking boiling the tannins out of that. And then if you need to, guess what you can save that water for tanning. And but actually figuring out, well, how did the Native Americans do this? Okay, they didn't have power. All right. And it's almost sad to say it, but the reason that we don't eat all of our walnuts here is because we just have too many to pick up. Okay. But if we had to, we could survive off of that. We could survive off of acorns. We could survive off persimmons, right? Wild persimmons and pawpaws and the fruits that we have, food forests. So let's start building. Let's plant an orchard. And now I've got runners that are coming up from our trees, and I dig those up and I put them out into the edges of our woods, so that more fruit trees can grow. And that's the whole vision of how we're here and why.
I love it. So you're banking natural capital, right? You're making significant investments in your natural capital, and you talked a little bit about perhaps your social capital, and we can go there. I think the first time I came across you, Tom, it was your thread about the ladies walking club, which absolutely tickled me to death. I don't know, when I just read that phrase, I was like, that is amazing. So you had invited this local ladies walking club, which I presume is a walking club for ladies that get together on a regular basis just to A, get to know each other, B, get to know a place, and both of those things I'm very passionate about. And I was like, "Who's this guy, Tom Ruby?" And I, looked into your threads and amazing content, and just the way you seem to interface. Well, at the top of the hour, I talked about the way you interface with people online. Very positive energy, very very friendliest guy on Twitter. But tell me a little bit more about how you integrate with your community. I mean, you can, I think consider yourself a localist. What does that mean to you?
It's funny, you mentioned the ladies walking club. It was actually the mother of a client of mine, a local CEO of a very successful local business 2 counties away, and he took me to have soup at his mom's house one day when it was my day to go down and visit the company. And we got to talking, and we had a lot of the same interests. And the next time I went down, I brought her some liqueurs, and she says, "Hey, I want to learn how to make these." And so I taught her how to make them. And she says, "Hey, I want to come to your farm, but can I bring my friends?" I go, "Yeah, sure. How many?" She goes, "Like 38." I said, "Okay, sure." And who are these 38 friends? She goes, "The Casey County Women's Walking Club." And I said, "Yeah, absolutely, 100%. She goes, "Could you want to, talk to them about simpling?" And because I had told her that I love the English word, the old English word for picking wild herbs is simpling.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I want you to talk to the ladies about simpling and about making liqueurs and then would you walk them through your farm and show them the different plants and let them pick their own, you know. I said, absolutely. That was just wonderful. And the first person that I met when we moved here was my state forester, and the second person that I met was my horticultural extension agent. You know, and I think everybody's got a county agent, whether or not they know it. They should get to know them if you're a farmer. Um, and they're great resources, and they can plug you into different um, into different circles. It wasn't long before my extension agent asked me to be on their board, um, and you get to meet different people. And I think that the whole beauty of localism is that you have a core circle, and I think of life as overlapping Venn diagrams. Okay, everybody's got their core circle, but all those core circles overlap with each other at some level. And I want all my friends to be friends with my friends. And the only way to do that is to introduce your friends to your other friends, right? And so maybe they can do something for somebody else somewhere else. And I don't think that breaks localism. That's one of the key principles of distributism. And so the Chesterton Society is formally does not use the term distributism anymore. They use the term localism because of the negative connotations that come from people really not understanding what distributism is and thinking that it means redistribution of wealth, and it's not. It is the distribution of the means it's the distribution of ownership of the means to make your own living. Okay, whether that's land, or whether that's a shop, or whether that's a skill, that's what distributism is. And localism at its best is being intensely connected to your, the heart of distributism and localism is the family, and then it builds, to the village and then the community, and the principles there are that you should never do anything at a higher level that can be done at a lower level. So the city should never make a decision for a family that a family can make, and the state should never make a decision for a local community that the local community can make. That's what the principle of subsidiarity is. When you try to make hard and fast rules that apply to everybody, everywhere, then you're breaking the principle of subsidiarity. And so I like the idea of local people getting together. So the Chesterton Society is wonderful because they have local Chesterton societies around the country, but they get together every year at a national conference, and they share, and then they trade, and whoever has the local conference, where they go that year, that person is in charge of putting it on, So if I was to visit you, I wouldn't presume to tell you how to do things on your property that's different than mine. Okay. But I would be looking to learn things that I can take from your property, nuts and seeds, to bring back here, and techniques that I can then teach my neighbors.
Yeah, I think one of the most beautiful things about the way you operate in the world, Tom, is that you really do, capitalism writ large at the global scale, right, is very much about a scarcity mindset, right? It's about like, there's not enough of this stuff, and that's why we have to charge for it, right? That's how you make your money. But you live this life of abundance, right? You're sort of, it seems like you sort of like have been stewarding this land because it was the right thing to do, and it has all this potential energy, right? As you've, in your own terms. But it seems like most of the time you have this eye to, how can I give this stuff away? Because that's the capital that I'm building locally. That is, if you're just making the maple liqueur for yourself, what's the point, right? Like, why just make it for yourself? You have this abundance. Why not share it with others? But I think, that's definitely something I aspire to, because I think that, abundance is just like pessimism and negativity can catch, right? Positivity and abundance can catch too, right? I don't like growing onions, but I don't have to grow onions if my neighbor likes growing onions. I can grow blueberries, right? Enough
right.
for all the neighbors. And I can be the blueberry guy, and someone else can be the onion person, and someone else can be the squash person, right? And I think that it shouldn't be very radical, because it is one of these like fundamental tenets of what the myth we tell ourselves about being an American, right? But it is pretty rare. It's pretty radical to be like, I'm going to think as much about what I can give away and the connections I can make through those gifts, as what I can provide for myself.
Yeah, it's interesting, Trace. You talk about you and your neighbor growing different things, but that presupposes a community. And the God is a community. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are a community, is a community. And the family is a community, and the neighborhood is a community, and the village is a community. You can't have specialization apart from a community. Okay. But if everything is made for atomization and transaction, then the community starts to break down and everybody looks at each other askance. Okay. And so one of the things that I find really odd and disturbing about society these days is that there's an immediate presumption of some kind of ooginess. Okay. If you try to be genuine, nobody's genuine. Everybody lies. Everybody's looking out for themselves. So anybody else that does something differently needs to be looked at askance. Okay. But it's not just capitalism that thinks of scarcity. Communism says their things are scarce, so the state will decide who gets what. Mm-hmm. Okay. In Chesterton, in his just brilliant book, The Outline of Sanity, which is an outline for distributism, he says that capitalism will ultimately fulfill the promises of socialism. Okay. That capitalism and socialism are the twin evils that suck men's souls by making them wage slaves to the industrial state. And one is a totalitarian state, and the other is a economic oligarchic state, which both do the same thing to men's souls. And the antidote to that is localism. The antidote to that is doing something on your own property, with your own skills, and then sharing it. You can make money off of it, but ultimately, how sad is it to make your own beer, or to make your own wine, or to make your own liqueur, and then sit in your own dungeon of your own making and drinking it by yourself? Okay, instead of sharing it with someone.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I mean, I think that's been I put a small piece. I started on the side yard, which is basically our front yard. Started putting, just planting flowers, and the initial version of it was terrible. I mean, admittedly, I did a terrible job. It was really half-assed. But the second iteration looked a little bit better, and I have plans to make it better and better. I'm learning, right? But I have met more of my neighbors since I put that darn garden in the front yard than I did in the 10 years I lived here prior. Because now all the gardeners are like, what are you doing? Like, everyone's just like, what's going on here? And there's this myth, right? Especially in the American suburbs, that like, oh, the HOA is going to get pissed off. Your neighbor is going to look at you weird if you're doing something in your front yard that's nothing but grass. And the truth is that there's a lot of people thinking like this. There's a lot of people that are just waiting for someone to take the lead. And then they'll be like, oh, well, great. I'll do that in my front yard. I mean, there's a neighbor that we're part of the pool together. I've known them for a decade now. And it finally occurred to me that like they have all these blueberry bushes in their front yard, like way more than they could ever, eat by themselves. And that's been a connection point with us. We haven't had much to be able to talk about where we're, and now we have this connection point, that we're both interested in growing things. And it's a genuine connection point. That's what I think is so fascinating, is that there's there is an immediate, like almost spiritual connection once you start working with plants, start working with animals, and start working with the land, no matter how degraded that land is. And it's almost like you become initiated in this little club, right? And you kind of wink at each other and go, "Oh, I know what you're doing here. I know how you feel about the world." You know,
you're describing something that I talked about. You're describing something I talked about at the Chesterton conference this past July in Milwaukee. I gave a presentation on, localism, and that it's not just this abstract, but it's an actual livable, possible life. Okay, and I said, when you plant a garden, when you plant an orchard, when you grow anything, you are literally participating in creation. Okay, God has given you the ability to participate in creation
and resurrection.
Okay? No, absolutely, 100%. Mm-hmm. I think what you just said, and resurrection. Think about I have a yellow tomato that's been growing outside my kitchen window on the east wall of the house. That should be the least growable wall of the house. Okay. Mm-hmm. Right below my kitchen window. And it started because I dumped I dumped a dead tomato 6 years ago out the window, and it grew the next spring. It resurrected. Okay. And so for the last 5 years, I've harvested tomatoes off of that, and I let a few rot and then fall to the ground each year. So you're participating in creation and resurrection. It's fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
you don't have to like those words, but that is what you're doing.
Sure, absolutely.
And we have this reminder every year. I think like if you're really spending a lot of time outside, observing the world, no matter how degraded, right? Like, I mean, I'm not going to pretend that my neighborhood is some sort of like paragon of regenerative ag or something, right? I mean, it's a 1960s suburban neighborhood, exactly what you'd expect that to look like. But there are 80-year-old, 90-year-old trees, and I can't tell you how many hours I've spent in my backyard staring at my tulip poplars and just being amazed that like these things have been growing they've been around here for at least twice as long as I've been on this planet. What things can I learn from these animal or these creatures that I'm sharing this space with? And I don't know. It's been an astounding experience. And I
trees,
I the same
trees fascinate me. Did you know that tulip poplars are not poplars? They're magnolias. Okay. If you look at the tulip poplar's flowers in the spring, okay, they're a magnolia, and the cone on the inside is the magnolia cone. Okay, it's fascinating. There are trees out there that are so the black locust and the honey locust are those are in the bean family. Okay, they're closer. They're legumes. They are in the legume. They're in the legume family, and they're closer to green beans than they are to oaks.
Yeah, just look at the flowers. The sunflowers are like exactly the same.
Yeah, they really do. And what's interesting is we think that trees are all the same. No, they are the woody cousins of their non-woody plants. Sassafras is closer to a bay leaf than it is, to an oak tree. Mm-hmm. It's fascinating.
Well, what is it like? Isn't there that I've seen kind of a meme chart about like the Brassica family that like basically all came from like one wild, and if you like one wild plant, and if you select for bigger flowers, you get broccoli, and if you select for different stems, you get Brussels sprouts, and it's just like it's basically the same darn plant, but just they gave steroids, genetic steroids to one aspect of it versus another. And now we have, 10 different species of plants from essentially one type of plant. Have you read, Tom, The Hidden Life of Trees?
Wollenbein, I absolutely love that book. I've given it as a gift.
Yeah. Every chapter is like, it's the smallest book that's ever taken me this long to read, because I basically read a chapter. It takes me 10 minutes, and then I just spend about 30 or 40 minutes staring off into the middle distance going, wow, I never thought about this stuff.
It's that book that made me, when I go foraging for mushrooms, when Laura and I are on vacation up north and I go foraging for mushrooms, I will not pull the mushroom out of the ground. Okay. I will cut it off with a knife, and, to leave the mycelium intact, to leave the roots intact. Trees talk to each other through a symbiotic relationship with mushrooms. And if we can't be amazed by that, I mean, if Chesterton knew that, he would have written books about that.
Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, trees, and the fact that we know so little about them. Like, it's like this thing that is like almost, the first thing that you can draw as a child is a tree. It's this thing we understand implicitly and don't understand them at all, really, when it comes down to it. It's their world. We're just living in it.
A month and a half ago, I was in Owensboro visiting my third daughter and her family. And they have some parks in town that have magnificent specimens of just massive, massive trees. And they've done just a fantastic job of diversifying their trees, but these are old specimens. And I was looking for a particular acorn from a swamp white oak, because this is just a fantastic tree and I'd love to have some of these at the farm, and I just couldn't find any. There just weren't any on the ground. And I had, my wife and my daughter were at the playground with the two granddaughters, and here I am wandering around this 12-acre park with my hands behind my back, bent over, looking for acorns. And I get back to the original tree, and my almost 3-year-old granddaughter Emma holds up this perfectly fresh, had to have been like within the last 10 seconds dropped swamp white oak acorn that was half the swamp white oak that was half the size of her hand. And she picks it up and she goes, "Here, Dad, are you looking for this?" I go, "Yes, honey, I'm looking for exactly that."
It's amazing. I want to get back to the topic of distributism and Chesterton. And, at the time that we scheduled this discussion, there was a lot of talk on Twitter, and a lot of contentious talk on sort of the deosphere, if you will, on Twitter about distributism. And, I have distributism in my profile. I'm a believer of distributism. One of the things that is really interesting to me, and I've actually played both sides of the issue, is the capacity for distributism today in the sort of political, cultural, religious, non-religious environment that we live in, right? And my fundamental question is, like, what do you think about the prospect of distributism without a moral foundation? And maybe that brings up a practical example for you. How do you feel like you can coexist in sort of an unofficial economy, a localist economy within your community, if you have different morals from your neighbors, or conflicting morals? And whatever that question means to you, maybe we can take that in a few different directions. But
it's really interesting, because there are some folks who genuinely believe that we need to have a gatekeeper type mindset, to keep bad actors. The idea there is that because people are fallen, bad actors are going to try to come in and hijack your good gig. Okay. And my response to that is, when has it ever not been thus? Okay. There've always been bad actors. And in the Middle Ages, everybody. So you guys remember the old show Justified? You follow that show?
Sure.
Okay. So probably the best line, my favorite line in that show is Raylan Givens is driving this dude, to be handed over to his, to his parole officer that had jumped bail. And the guy was just would not shut up. And Raylan says to him, something, if you meet an asshole in the morning, you met an asshole. But if you meet assholes all day long, you're the asshole. Okay. And the point there is that, even in medieval times when people lived in small villages, everybody knew who that guy was. Okay. But the village itself, everybody knew who was fervent believers and who were semi-believers and who was the asshole, right? But you could only be so much of a dick because eventually people wouldn't buy from you, right? Or they wouldn't talk to you, or they wouldn't help you if you got sick. Okay. So there was a natural limit. And I think that natural limit still applies. Okay. We know here in our community on the Knob who doesn't get help and who doesn't ask for it and is never going to get it. Okay. And we know who runs to each other's aid. When the group chat comes up and says, hey, something just happened, it's, who's going to be offering help. Okay. And it's never not been thus. Okay. So is distributism possible today on a large scale? Well, it's certainly not imposed. Distributism can never start from the top down because that in itself breaks the principle of subsidiarity, right? So for distributism to work, it has to start at a local level. Now, it's difficult for it to start at a local level today. Why? Because people don't have the means today. Like how many people today can't even afford to buy a home? Okay. And they don't make a living wage. So it's pretty hard, it's hard to be like my sister does flowers for weddings and events. Okay. But she has to compete against, Costco. Okay. And so it's difficult to do that. It's difficult for mom and pop to compete. We've got a local coffee shop here in town. It's a local coffee shop. And yet at 3:00 in the afternoon, there's 16 cars in line at the Starbucks on the bypass. Okay. And when for less than half the price, they can get a better cup of coffee at the local coffee shop. Okay. So you can't force distributism, and just like you can't force morality. If you're going to make your red line of what you will and won't accept so close to your body that only you exist in an atomized person, okay, then when you die and nothing else, can ever possibly move on, right? But if you, so somebody said to me at the chest train conference this year, says, you have lesbians in your village? And I said, yes. He said, and you invite them over to your house? Yes. What do you talk about? Like lots of things, like,
liqueur, gardening,
right. How much we love our families. Okay. Yeah. And he says,
books you've read, the TV shows you guys have watched,
And what's interesting is that the priest that was in the discussion jumps in and he says he's friends with them because they're not a placeholder for his ideology. Okay. And that's a really important point. If you look at people as a placeholder for your ideology, then you're never going to be able to be friends with anybody. And your circle is going to necessarily be small. And if your kids decide to go off on their own and leave your circle, then you're going to be sad and they won't be part of your circle. Okay. And I'm thankful that our kids want to come back to the farm. I'm thankful that our kids like it here. They don't all live here because they've got, different lives. It's not possible for my oldest daughter and her husband to live here because he's an engineer for the Air Force and he has to live where he lives. Okay. And so you do the best you can in the moment that you can do it in whatever it is that you're doing, and you build locally. And I think that's how distributism is going to make it. I think that localism is going to win the day eventually. And whether it's through another Carrington event or whether it's through a long, slow process. I mean, listen, the hubris of thinking that we're going to do it in our age when it hasn't been able to be done up until now throughout humanity is just it's high hubris.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, you mentioned. I guess one of my concerns with the prospect of distributism is that it seems to me, a certain element hinges on the need for a trust-based society. And from my perspective, a trust-based society is in large part, at least, a product of many generations in place. Families who have known families for a long, long time. And when that is the case, when families know each other for a long, long time, and families and people know a place for a long, long time, they treat their place certainly, and they treat their neighbors with grace, and they give them a lot of leeway for disagreement. That's just my personal perspective. And
no, that's not just a personal perspective. That's a correct perspective.
Sure,
I mean,
yeah.
Let me put it to you this way. People that don't live in those communities, like people that live in the city, what do they always long for? Do they long for more noise, or do they long for a weekend? Why do they go to Airbnbs in the country? Okay, so there are fundamental truths. Okay, so we talk about the transcendentals, right? Beauty, goodness, and truth. They transcend everything. Okay, and so people know what is true whether or not they practice it. Okay, they know what goodness is whether or not they practice it. Okay, and so people that live in the cities and that live that rat race and have convinced themselves that that's what they really ought to be doing, they look longingly at pictures like in your profile of the mountains. Okay. They look longingly at pictures of my woods in the fall. Okay. Or of Laura holding a massive bowl of fruit that's just overflowing. They look longingly at that. Okay. And they know that it's true, and they know that it's good, and they know that it's beautiful. And so what I think society if society had a collective brain, society's collective brain would say there are people like in the DO community that are holding that on and passing that on, even if I'm not participating in that.
Yeah, where I was going was, so distributism perhaps is, hinges on a high trust society, and so high trust society perhaps hinges on, many generations in place. Strikes me now, vast generalization, obviously, but we are lacking in trust. We are excessive in hypermobility. So how do we get from here to there? I love the theory of distributism. I've seen it in practice, in my own life, in a small d distributism sense, a localism sense, it's very much the way I grew up. But that seems to be fewer and farther between. And, when I was pressing against folks who made the distributism can be a large tent argument, I was saying, I'm not so sure about that. I'm not so sure about that because my perspective now is that we as a society are very thin in trust, and we don't have a whole heck of a lot of shared morals. And, I made an off-color joke perhaps, but, I felt like a lib version of distributism was going to be more about grievance disputes and less about the actual work getting done because, distributism and small-scale private productive property ownership is work, and subsidiarity and self-governance is work. And when
Yep.
you don't have a high trust society, it's grievance disputes one after another. So like how could we get there? Is that's my doom, I guess.
So
from a
I agree with you that that's what it's turning into, but that doesn't, it's not what it has to be. So
Sure.
I've made it clear that my kids don't have to live here because I can't. So first of all, I can't force them to come live here. Okay. But I've always made it clear that there is room for them here. And if they do want to live here, we'll make room for them. Okay. If they want to build their own house here, there'll be room for them. Okay. If one of them wants to take over this house, they can have it. And Laura and I will build a cottage. Okay. To live in. And they come back here to touch the place and they know that. And I think that, well, at least 2 of the 4 would like to come back here and actually live here. Okay. But they have to have that imbued in them. They have to have that it's not like a it's not like a North Korean camp, where you're doing indoctrination. They have to see it from a standpoint of love. You can't fake that love for your own place. So if you don't love your place, you're not going to, you're not going to pass that on to your kids. You have to have the actual love for the place. And once they see that, then they can know that it's okay to love it and then learn to love it themselves. And it doesn't just have to be your kids. I mean, I can't tell you how many friends that we've had come here that want to. I've got my college roommate that I hadn't talked to in 35 years just came and visited me with his wife, and is now asking me about going to look at land for him out here.
Awesome.
Okay, because he wants to move from California to something that's genuine. And this goes back to what I was saying about people know the transcendentals when they see it. Okay. And so if you share your land instead of hiding it, if when the UPS lady comes up here and she goes, I never even knew this place existed. I go, you want to come take a look? Yeah, actually I do. Can I get you a water? And then let's go look around. You got to do that with your places. Okay. Mm-hmm. Trace, invite people over. AC, invite people over and show them. Mm-hmm. Make it a place for people to want to come visit.
Yeah, I like to say that someone cannot steal something which is freely given. And I think that that's probably one of the core aspects of the turn the other cheek kind of mantra that people always bring in. There's the surface one, which is if someone does you harm, you're getting riches in heaven, so who cares what earthly harms you're facing? But I think there's the more fundamental aspect of that teaching and various other teachings in the Bible, which are that, the Romans did not kill Jesus. He gave his life freely, right? And that is a very fundamental difference, right? He wasn't a victim. He wasn't a victim at all. It was a gift of love. And I think that, a whole lot of people in America right now are saying, I want to be part of a community, but they don't want to do the work that is necessary to create a community. And if everyone's sitting around playing chicken with each other, being like, well, I don't want to be the first one I don't want to be taken advantage of. That's what I hear in cities all the time. Is like, I don't want to just give stuff away because then people will just take advantage of it. And that's why I always come back and say, yes, exactly. That's why I always come back and say, well, if I'm giving it away, then no one's taking advantage of me, right? I'm giving it away. It doesn't really matter what other people's motives are for taking it from me, because I'm giving it away. And it also is, you mentioned this earlier, Tom, it is a little bit disarming, right? Like in a low trust society, people don't know what to do with someone who comes to every interaction with a degree of trust innately, saying like, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. And in fact, I'm going to give you first and expect nothing in return. is a completely alien concept to modern American society. But it's surprising how many people respond to it. I think that we have this feeling that, like, if I do that, people will take advantage of me. And the truth is that you activate in others something that is somewhat innate. This kind of sense of, like, actually, no, we do owe something to each other as a society, as a community. And if you give first, I will give in return.
You do owe something to other people, and you ought to give. And this whole idea that it's hard, everything is hard. Your job is hard. It's just a different kind of hard. And if Adam, who tweets at Empty America, talks about how many hours what are the hours that are required in farming certain types of grains or farming certain types of cattle. Here in Kentucky, most of the farming is cattle farming. Now, some people do grow corn and they rotate corn and soy, and some even do wheat, but most of the farming is pastured cattle farming. It's not CAFOs. And these guys make a sufficient living, but they're not super wealthy, but they're happy. Okay. And when you can step out of the rat race and figure out what's sufficient. I mean, I just came back from the Amish today with 50 pounds of dough. I shot a doe on Saturday. They had it ready for me yesterday. I was out sitting in the stand this afternoon, had a really, really large buck walk past that I could not get a shot at because of the brush. And I didn't want to take that shot because I didn't think it would be ethical. But, Laura and I buy almost no meat. Okay. We buy very, very little meat because, it's essentially free for me here. Okay. Mm-hmm. And if I did all the processing myself, it would be a lot less, but I actually like going to the Amish. Okay. And I get my meat for under $2 a pound, processed and wrapped and, vacuum sealed and labeled and everything. And I know the folks there, and that's localism. Right. And, I think that it's much easier to make a living, a sufficient living, and a genuinely happy living than people think. They've been duped. People have been duped and socially engineered in thinking that you have to be on the treadmill, that you have to be suffering. And you ought to read Joseph Pieper's book, Leisure, The Basis of Culture. Okay. AC, do you know that book?
I'm familiar with it, but I haven't read it.
Yeah, it's just, we were not made to be wage slaves. We were not made to work all day long in a factory. Okay.
Or to desk.
Our purpose of living is not to work. Mm-hmm. Your purpose of working is to live. And that we've got so many people today, the majority of people, I would venture to say, that have totally bought in on that and go, yeah, that's crazy. No, we're supposed to be working. That's how you find value in life, right? My third daughter graduated with honors in 3 years from college, summa cum laude, and presented as an undergraduate, presented her research at the Midwest Psychological Association. And the women in her department were incensed when she got married and had a kid after graduating, because she turned her back on the movement, or whatever the heck that's supposed to mean, right? Because she didn't go to work all of her life, okay, and she's got 2 kids and a third any day now it's going to be born, and that's the summum bonum. Not working all day until you can't stand up, and having a good distributist life, leading a rural life, is charming for a reason. Okay, my cousins that live in the city, they're far less happier than I am today. Okay, they're far less happier than I am. Do you AC, wish that you lived in the city?
I kind of do at the moment. I'm certainly not from the city. I grew up in a very small rural village in New Hampshire. I still am a property owner. All my family's up there. The family farm is up there and everything else. And so I'm sort of like a stranger without a country, where I'm currently at right now. But I do agree with you. I think people know beauty and transcendentalism when they see it. Like you said, they may not know why. They may not know why exactly they gravitate towards those things, and I think it's sort of our job to guide them back home, in a certain way. And
That's
I've
what
said
Dio's
this.
job is.
Yeah, I said that in the past. The way I grew up is very much the Dio way right now, and everybody thinks that it's hard work, and everybody thinks that it's been so long ago. And for me, it was it's 30 years ago. I was a kid, and my brother is very much living the same life, and he's raising his kids the way we grew up, or his son, and hopefully future more kids. But the way that we grew up, it's possible. It's possible if you have the right priorities, right? So perhaps we can evangelize and guide people to the good life, So.
Yeah, and people say, "Dude, you're 60." I'm almost, not quite, but and I still have to chainsaw, and I cut my own wood, and I got the wood stove going right now so that I don't have to use the furnace in the house. And yeah, it's work, and it's good for you, and the dudes that post their pictures from the gym, and how buff they are. I challenge you to lift a 200-pound slack deer off the ground and throw it in the back of your truck. And I've had young gym rats say to me, "What are you talking about, old man? You just grab it and throw it in the truck." I'm like, dude, it's not on a fixed bar. Okay. Try to lift
dead weight for no reason.
try to lift a slack 200-pound, try to lift a 7-foot long, 200-pound chain off the ground. Okay. That, just, there's real, it's different. The work out here is different, and it's good. It's the kind of work that God intended, cutting logs and like literally hoeing the ground. I'm telling you, getting on your knees with a hand trowel and digging weeds will sap your energy quickly.
Sure.
Okay. And that's good work.
I want to. We're starting to run long on time, but there is another aspect that we haven't talked about. You mentioned it, but that's your association with cultural debris. I've been interested in that, and I followed your trip to Italy recently. I'd love to hear a little bit more about cultural debris. What is it?
Well, it's not my gig. Cultural debris is the project of Alan Cornett, who tweets at Alan Cornett and at Cultural Debris. But we were Twitter mutuals, and so here's again overlapping Venn diagrams. We're Twitter mutuals. I find out that he lives, an hour away from me. I sent him a DM and said, "Hey, would you like to have coffee?" And he says, "Sure." And we become friends. And I said, "Hey, have you ever thought about doing a trip with your listeners?" And he says, "Yeah, I don't know that I've got enough listeners that would want to go on a trip, but yes, I'd love to do that. Have you ever done that?" I said, "Yeah, I've actually done that professionally." And so we talked about it, and we picked a place that I was pretty familiar with, that had been to a few times, had some help from people there on the ground. And when my family and I went there this past spring, we kind of did a dry run of the trip, and Alan started he advertised it on his podcast, and we both tweeted about it, and we filled up 1 week, a very small group, six guests. The idea was that we would do a deep dive, a week-long deep dive into one place that people don't otherwise go to. Okay. And Genoa, I think, is the best city in Italy. Nobody goes to visit it. Why? Because everybody goes to Rome, Florence, and Venice. And it's this magnificent city that people might have heard about. Columbus is from there. And it's a wonderful place, and it has riches to mine for a whole week. And we ate breakfast together every day. We had a main meal together every day. We did some kind of activity together every day, and people got to be good friends on this trip, and they still talk to each other in the group chat. And it is literally doing localism at a next higher level, learning about another local place. And
localism on tour.
Yeah, it really is. And it turned out great. And we're thinking about doing 2 trips next year, one to Bavaria and one back to Genoa again. So
awesome. What is the concept of cultural debris? And I would love to, maybe you could make an introduction to Alan. It would be great to have him on. And I don't want you to speak for him, but just in general, we've teased it. What is the high level?
Alan is a near adjacent to DO. He follows the DO circles, and he reads many of the DO conversations. Cultural debris takes its name from a Russell Kirk essay of the same title, Cultural Debris, and Alan Cornett was a assistant to Russell Kirk, and he's kept in contact with the Kirk family and the Kirk Center over the years. And so his idea is to interview people that are interesting to him, that talks about culture. And so he has had people on that talk about architecture. He's had people on to talk about localism. He's had people on to talk about conservatism and the original conservatism of Russell Kirk. He talks to he interviewed Danielle O'Terry, who wrote a magnificent article a couple of years ago called the Secrets of the Unicorn Tapestry. And she does her own tours to southern Italy. And it was a magnificent, just a lovely interview to listen to. And I reached out to Alan because I listened to some of his podcasts, and I liked some of his tweets, and he seemed like an interesting person, and he was close by. And I thought, well, this is how you expand your circles.
Absolutely. Great story.
In fact, he's going to be speaking at the Chesterton Conference next year on Chesterton and Russell Kirk.
Perfect.
Beautiful.
Fantastic. Tom, this has been great. I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I do want to give you the opportunity to sort of give any closing remarks that you might have, last thoughts, and also, anything you'd like to plug. Obviously, follow Tom on Twitter, but any parting thoughts? I think this conversation's been fantastic. It's been great to meet you.
Well, thank you. I would ask everybody to try to expand your circle of friends, and if you think that your friends are good enough to be your friends, introduce them to other people. Okay, and then really do the best that you can do at whatever it is that you're doing at the moment that you're doing, and then it's going to attract other people to want to do the same.
And meet your mutuals in real life, right?
Love everyone, no caveats.
Absolutely. Tom, Trace, this has been fantastic. Thank you for joining us, Tom. We look forward to more tweets and more cordials on Twitter. I hope everybody enjoying this conversation. It was really great to meet you. We will see you on the other side.
You guys. I mean, just super to meet you in person. Thanks, Absolutely. Trace. I'll see you soon, too.
Thank you, Tom.
All right, great. Take care.